Sara Temarco, and I work in the business school with Richard Croucher on the research funding projects. My role is to support and to coordinate the research applications. So from beginning, from detecting the right calls to the right people, setting up a bid team, supporting through the application process until the whole proposal has gone out. My background is in consulting. I spent 4 years in a smaller consulting for HR in the financial sector, which is now part of AON. And then I spent another 4 years in a bigger consulting group for HR, which is now called John Towers Watson. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So yeah, this is, I am quite a novice. I consider myself a young girl. I've been here since January. So, you know, I'm still kind of swimming through this ocean of what research funding is and research funding opportunities. But I just would like to share with you 2 things that I've noticed in the last 4 months. So the first one is that the calls that we seem to receive regularly every week on the internet or via email seem to be quite generic for the business school. And I would like to do something about that to support you, whether it's filtering through them. I just need to think about something. But I'd like to share this with you because I would like to get some feedback. The second point that I raise is, which I noticed, is that when the right call comes through, it's not really easy to find the people that are going to join on a bid team or you know, are willing to do this type of research. For lots of good reasons, you know, people are busy teaching or they are focused on another project. You know, there are lots of other justifiable reasons. But to make the whole thing happen, and for myself, I'm called the facilitator or enabler, I created a small questionnaire for you that is on these chairs for you to fill in and put your research focus areas and what type of grants you would be interested in. So that helps me have in mind yourselves when I am looking through these calls that come through the RKTO or other funding opportunities that are around on the internet. And I also have printed out a few small opportunities, small grants opportunities, which are involving seminars, conferences, building links with other partners, or you know, small grants for research. And if you're interested, I've got them there, and come and see me after this session. I now leave the floor to Daniel, who is going to talk about the project proposals and funding opportunities in more details. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for organising today.
That's all right.
Really appreciate that. So I'm going to start off by asking everyone a question. Okay. Just before we started, I put a gold diamond ring in this box. Don't be deceived by the kind of shaggy appearance of the Sainsbury's Basics kettle. There's a gold diamond ring in there, and it's worth £500. Yeah. So I want to hear from you guys. Who's going to offer me the most? Kind of like having an auction, you know. Who wants to give me, say, £50 for that ring in there? It's worth 500, yeah? So it's a good deal.
Yeah, come on.
50?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone want to offer any more, any less?
So what does it mean? I'm giving you £50 and I'm getting...
You're getting a diamond ring. It's worth 500.
We don't get to see it before we bid.
Well, I had it valued last week, so you don't have to
Give
worry
me
about
proof.
seeing it.
I don't believe you. I want to see proof.
No?
I want to see a document showing the design. Sorry.
That's a bit picky.
I don't trust
You're
you.
trying to ruin my session already. So any other offers, or are we going to go with 50 for
business
Sarah
with
here?
friends. Business with
Would
friends.
anyone give me 10 for it? £10?
If you show me evidence, then
Okay, that's enough from you. It's always one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, basically, so you've got this £50,
Thank
Sarah.
you very
Thanks for that,
much.
and well done. That's a bargain. So you can open it up and enjoy the ring. But don't tell my wife I've given you a ring.
Right.
What's in there?
Nice. Nothing. Oh.
Why?
you see, I was right.
You were right. Why didn't you offer me? Why did no one offer me like 100 or 200?
I wouldn't offer you anything.
Why?
Because I don't believe you.
Why
I didn't
didn't
believe
you?
it in the first place.
Okay, so you didn't trust me?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, you didn't trust me. I don't think anyone else trusted me.
I
Maybe
did.
Sarah did slightly.
That's why founders wouldn't trust us.
Right, thank you. Do you want to come do the session? That's the key point that I wanted to get across, okay? That when you're trying to get money in from funders, whether they be research funders, the National Lottery, whoever it might be, what they want to see is that they can trust you with their money. Okay, it's their money, or they're entrusted on behalf of someone else, whether it be through a will bequest or something, to administer and give out grants on behalf of that person who's deceased or whatever. So the key point is with fundraising, can they trust you? Who are you? What kind of reputation do you have in taking funds and using them and using them successfully, right? And ideally, yeah, you know, how well do they know you as a person? Okay, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on. The more, the warmer the contact, the more friendly you are, or the closer you are to the person giving money out, in all kinds of senses, the more likely they are to give you funding. Okay, so that's the key message that I want us to think about for today, and I'm going to explain a bit more about the nature of this talk. So this is kind of like, I think most of you, or a lot of you were here at the session that Richard and Anne and Stephen and Martin gave a few weeks ago on research funding. I think quite a few. Who was here for that one? Oh, some of you, one of you.
Well, in January, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
January,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's kind of like, I suppose in a sense that's good, because you don't need to have been to that one to understand what's going on in this one. That one was quite focused on research funding, and it was focused very much on the research funding pools that we're all used to, so the ESRC, the British Academy, and European Union funding streams. What this session is different, why it's different, why I think it's important people are here, is because we're going to be looking into what I call hidden funding streams that most academics have never heard of before, and they certainly haven't applied to before. Yeah? And actually, we're going to look at some graphics in a minute that show that the chances of us getting funding from those sources are actually quite high. Okay? But, as I say, most academics wouldn't have a clue. They wouldn't know, because why would they? They're only ever taught about the kind of strictly research funding based streams that are available. Is anyone here from an NGO or a charity, by the way? Or are we all... Actually, you work with them? Good. Because, in a sense, this session kind of, it walks a tightrope between the two. Okay? So everything I'm going to talk to you about is equally applicable, and as I say, it's not at a particular time, to project and NGO fundraising as it is specifically to research funding. So that's actually quite good that some of you have those backgrounds. Now, when I was talking about alternative fundraising sources, what I'm really talking about is charitable trusts and foundations. There are 10,000 charitable trusts and foundations in the UK, and they all give grants between a few £100, a few £100,000, and in some cases a few £1 million. Okay. And they're surprisingly overlooked by academics, and they're surprisingly overlooked by universities. I'm going to try and fit this session into an hour, but depending on how, like, I'd encourage you to ask questions, during, but we'll have some time for questions at the end. If you have to go at 2, or I know Elizabeth's got an exam, for example, that's to go to, that's fine. But I'm going to try and squeeze it in, but if we go over, then hopefully you can bear with me for a bit. So this is kind of what we're going to be looking at then. We're going to be, of all the different funders that are out there, and I've just mentioned that there are 10,000 charitable foundations, we're going to be looking at how we identify those, okay? So as not to waste our time sending applications out to the wrong places that wouldn't consider us in the first place. We're also going to be looking at different fundraising sources. How do we find out about these sources that I'm talking about? And we're going to be looking at the different materials, guides online, books and stuff that are available to do that. We're going to be looking at some golden kind of fundraising rules, I call them fundraising rules, the golden rules, that everyone needs to abide by when we're applying. Different techniques as well, because it's not just about writing, there's other things involved too, lobbying, phoning, the gatekeeper in some cases, all that kind of stuff. How we actually write a project proposal, and I'm not going to lecture writing application forms so much, because a lot of you in the room have done that, but we're going to be looking at different kinds of proposals that we can put forward in how we write those, including the freestyle proposals. And once you've obtained the grant, only half the job has actually been done, because there's a report back procedures that we need to continue to follow in order to keep the donor on side. Because once you've received a grant from a donor, they're something like 7 or 8 times more likely to give you a grant again as you would be getting a grant from a new donor. So maintaining relationships with donors is always key. So just to reiterate, this isn't a research funding specialist course in the sense that the one that we had a few weeks ago is, but we will be going over, it is obviously applicable to the environment that we work within, as well as those of us that work in NGOs and charities and that kind of stuff. So this is a bit about me. I know most of you. I'm a lecturer here in Leadership Work and Organisation Department. The late Tony Benn once said, before someone claims to be an authority figure on anything, you should ask, who elected them, what have you done, how are they qualified to share what they do, and how can I get rid of you? So I'm going to focus on the who am I and what have I done part, and hopefully you'll believe that I'm qualified to be talking about what I'm doing. So before I moved into academia, I was in fundraising. I worked as a project manager for 2 large NGOs and project and fundraising manager for 2 large NGOs. And what I realised was that these NGOs had an enormous amount of resources available to raise funds for their different projects. But at the same time, there were all these little NGOs who are completely volunteer-run, doing fantastic work in countries overseas and developing countries largely. And they just didn't know how to get the funding. They couldn't compete with the Oxfams, the Red Crosses, and that kind of thing. They didn't have the materials, they didn't have the professional knowledge, they couldn't employ a professional fundraiser. So I set up my own consultancy called Daniel Ozarow, and actually went to them and said, look, I can do short-term contracts for you, save a month or 2 months. Go out and get you loads of funding in from charitable foundations and trusts. So you can kind of really, not only fund the projects that you have, but also expand them. And, of course, the other side, given what I just said about ongoing relationships and sustainability, is I can also help you to develop longer-term relationships with them. And I did that for 3 years, and it was incredibly successful. I never did 1 penny worth of advertising. It was all done through word of mouth. I went to one small NGO, raised 50 grand for them, then they'd kind of recommend me to their friends, and that whole thing went on for 3 years before I started my PhD here. And in total I raised £1 million for the different charities that are up there. So it was really enjoyable, it was good fun, and I think a lot of great changes were made. Hospitals were built in Cambodia, health facilities were established in Mombasa in Kenya, whereas Spiti village in the Indian hills for Tibetan refugees that escaped and went there. We set up some cultural protection projects and educational projects there, self-sustainable kind of microfinance projects. So it was all really great, and then I started my PhD here, which was...
Great result.
Yeah, that's right, it was great as well, yeah. Yeah. So, some words of wisdom from 2 fundraising experts. The first one from this guy called Hank Rousseau. He said that fundraising is the gentle art of teaching the joy of giving. So, giving money should be a joy. If you're, obviously not if you're kind of bidding for a ring and you don't trust me. But if you've got funding to give out for a good purpose, then it should be a pleasure to give it out. And what we're about as people that are trying to get that funding is to make it a pleasurable experience for them, if you see what I mean. The second citation here is that donors don't give to institutions. They don't give necessarily to Middlesex University. They don't give to Oxfam. They don't give to whichever organisation it may be. They give to ideas, and they give to people that they believe are going to deliver the projects and deliver the promises that they've made. So it's going back to the box kind of thing at the start. And again, just reiterating that point really. We have got a good name behind us at Middlesex University. The university has so many, it's used funding in the past for so many good initiatives. But ultimately, as you all know, probably most of you know, funding bodies will not give just off the back of the name of Middlesex University. They want to know, why are you qualified to spend that money? Why do you have the research and the knowledge in your head in order to do it? How do you have the resources available to do it? This is more true of charitable trusts and foundations who aren't in the university world. Okay, they tend to support charities, and they tend to support NGOs, they tend to support voluntary organisations. So they won't actually, Middlesex University's name won't actually mean as much to them as it would do to the SRC, for example. So we have to push home the point about who we are, while we've got the expertise to do the research and then deliver a practical project, because often they'll combine the two elements. So this is a key slide, okay, that I think needs to be shown a lot. This is, in the last financial year, this is how funding was distributed in the UK to organisations and individuals through these different organisations. And as you can see there, of the total Research Council funding that went out last year, 1.4 billion, these are in millions, these figures, only a small fraction of that, 29 million, went to the SRC. So the overwhelming majority went to the Medical Research Council, and it went to, I think it's the Physical and Engineering Research Council. So only a tiny fraction of that went to the SRC. Similar amount of funding went to the British Academy. Again, we're talking about a very small amount of overall research funding.
And by the way, the same proportion goes with the European Union funding, so the 2020 program.
Yeah.
It's the same proportion. I mean, there's a minuscule that goes to our areas.
And 2020 is one of the biggest.
For the social and
program.
cultural, is the legacy, I mean, the next one, the Horizon 2020, is the worst, is worse than it was previously.
Anyway, so about 2% of overall Research Council funding goes to, I think most of us here from business school, is a very small proportion of that. But then when you look at these figures here, you know, it's quite mind-blowing. You might be familiar with this figure, 1.8 billion pounds of funding from the National Lottery. Okay, there are projects we can apply for here in the National Lottery funding streams. I'll talk a bit about that later. But the main pools here, as you can see, 9.3 billion pounds of funds went out from charitable trusts and foundations. Now there are huge charitable trusts and foundations like the Wellcome Trust that you might have heard of, that, you know, probably account for, say, £500 million or maybe even £1 billion. But there are 10,000 or so small to medium-sized, large, and when I say large I mean giving out probably less than £50 million a year, funds, many of which we would be eligible to apply for, many of which of course we wouldn't. One of the key questions, I might answer, I'll come back to in a second again, is when you're applying to these trusts and foundations, some of them require that you have charitable status with the Charity Commission. We obviously don't. We've got charity exempt status as a university, but not charitable registered charity status. So that will exclude us from some of those trusts and foundations. And it's a question of looking at what the requirements are, and we'll talk about how we do that in a minute. So, first of all, we're going to look at kind of choosing a funder. And there are all these different kinds of funders out there. Yeah. We can probably think of some examples just by looking at this slide, but they basically break down into individual and institutional. Okay, so individual, we're talking about obviously general public, kind of public appeals like a lot of charities do. And there's obviously kind of major, what we call major donors or individual philanthropists who give out money for different reasons. But we're probably more interested ourselves in the institutional funding side. And there are obviously overseas agencies like the ones that Elizabeth was talking about earlier, DFID, USAID, and those kind of things. If we're doing work overseas, or our research is attached to project delivery overseas, we might well be eligible for those kinds of funds. Local actors is probably not so relevant for this kind of talk. It's more, things like local churches, local shops, local businesses that might be interested in supporting the projects that we have. I mean, to some extent, local businesses, I'm sure the Development Office would tell me that we do work with local businesses, possibly even local voluntary groups, faith organisations and so on. But again, that's not really going to be the focus of today, but it might be something that, when we're looking at funding for a project we have in mind, we do need to bear in mind all of the options. There's no point in just thinking about one or two, because we're kind of chopping off our hands before we've even started. Charitable foundations is the thrust of what we're talking about. Charitable foundations, in a nutshell, are they're basically pots of money that are held in trust by a number of individuals. So it might be half a dozen, it might be a dozen, it might even be one or two specific people who are entrusted with a kind of funding pool. And that the way that charitable funds originate is often, as I mentioned earlier, through, say, the will of someone's deceased and has left a will behind. It might be through a big company like Ford or Roundtree even, who are attached to a business and they use the business profits for, as part of their CSR policy to distribute funds to good causes. So often company and charitable foundation funds are very much tied in, but not always. A lot of them do come not from companies, as I say, but through private sources for other means. Supranational organisations like the EU, obviously, national government funds as well. I think a couple of over here were talking earlier about some of the funds you've applied to there. And really it's just a question of thinking, well, what is our project most suited to? Yeah? And there are all kinds of things that will lead us to try and answer those questions. Generally speaking, before we target a specific funder, we need to think about what our funding needs are. So we're at the kind of before you apply stage. I'm going to try and take you through the process of how you apply from start to finish. Often, so there's two kinds of funding needs really. There's unrestricted income, which are day-to-day running costs of an organisation, and then there's specific restricted income. So you apply for a particular project or for a particular fund, a particular use, which is probably where we're more interested in. But if you're going for unrestricted funds, you'd probably tend to go for company, individual, some foundation, or local actors. But we're probably more interested in the bottom part of the chart, because most of the projects I think we're involved with are about getting a specific research project implemented. So we're left with these sources then, statutory sources, so government sources, the kind of lottery I suppose to an extent, European Union to some extent as well, private sources like trusts and foundations. Just to kind of give you an idea, unrestricted funds, as I said, it's day-to-day costs, so things like salaries, the upkeep of a building that you're operating in, rent, for example, administration costs. Restricted are discrete projects. And of course you might have specific running costs within those, but as long as you can ring-fence them and show that they're only going to be used for that purpose, then these kind of organisations will be interested. This isn't like there's some flexibility within this, okay? It's not kind of cut and dry. So the key question is, I think a lot of you are going to be asking, well, how do I find out where these sources are? Yeah? Where can I find them? How can I find out about what they do? So, of the 10,000 charitable trusts and foundations that are out there, and by the way, there are tens of thousands more in the European Union and in the United States and Canada and places like that, every single one will have very specific criteria about what they give funding to. And it will often be extremely specific. Yeah? So you have some trusts and foundations that only give funding for projects that help a particular faith community, for example, or a particular minority group, or a particular, it might be we only support sports activities for young people. Yeah? It might even be we only support, you might find this funny, vegetarians. Yeah? There's a couple of trusts that only support vegetarians. There's another trust that's linked to the TUC that supports initiatives that support trade union work, and research on trade unions and kind of workplace issues as well. So, given that they've all got these really tiny kind of niches, our job is to try and work out which ones will support the research that we're trying to do. So, this is one way that you can try and do this. There's an organisation called the Directory of Social Change. Has anyone heard of that? It's based down in Euston, just next to Euston Station. They've got their headquarters. It's like a research centre for the voluntary sector.
How is it called again?
Directory of Social Change. Yeah. And one of the things they do is they publish these directories of all these charitable trusts and foundations. And they break them down just to make it a bit easier. So there's the grant-making trust. There's also a list of companies that give, and there's a list of grants for educational purposes. There's a directory of grants for individuals in need, and there's a one for sports kind of needs and stuff like that. You can get them in public libraries. There are some available in Hendon Library. And what I'm probably going to try and do, if there's an interest, is ask the library here to get hold of some copies. Yeah? They're probably only going to be available in reference, but it's just a question of going to the library and looking through them. They are available online as well. And it may be possible for the university to purchase a license. I think Sarah and I will talk about that afterwards and see if we can do that. So what do they look like? When you go to these resources, what does a typical trust entry look like? Okay, so it's not just the DSE. The DSE is the main organisation that produces these directories, by the way. There are others. So this is what an entry would look like. And it's all kind of broken down, so it's fairly easy to read. Okay? And there's a glossary section, usually at the back, that actually kind of points you to the page numbers of all the trusts that, say, operate in the area of education, for example, or in the area of, work and unemployment or employment issues. Or I haven't put that up on the slides, but that's the first thing you probably do is actually go to that list at the back, and they've got subheadings for different topics, and you possibly look up that way. But once you've done that, you go back to the actual trust entries themselves. This is what it looks like. So the first thing is eligibility. Every single entry will say what kind of organisations can apply, what kind of organisations are excluded, what kinds of grants are given, who they're given for. Okay, so it might be people with disabilities, it might be LGBT, it might be education, it might be young people. There'll always be a specific list of kind of purposes that the trust gives money to. Then there's a types of grant section, as you can see there, and it might be small one-off grants, it might be ongoing grants, it might be grants for infrastructure, it might be grants for training, or it might be grants for, I don't know what, So it might be grants for research. Often, this is an important point, often trusts won't say we only give grants for research, but they will give grants for projects with a research component. Yeah? So when we're applying for research funding, there's often, especially with the EU or British Academy, ESRC, there's often a project attached to it that will actually implement something practical. Okay? And that's really the strength of these trusts and foundations for us, because they want to see the two things. They're aware that kind of social change can't happen without research being done first, yeah? And that's where we come in. So often when you're applying, it will be about applying for the two kinds of funding, if you like, at the same time. And then it will give you an indication of how many grants they give out and what their general kind of funding pool is as well. This can be useful to help you prioritise, because the kind of trusts that give larger amounts of grants obviously will be the ones that we want to target first. And then it explains how you actually make an application. So this one says, on a form available from the correspondent, something done directly by the individual or the parent or guardian. Well, okay, so this is very specific. It's probably it's for children's purposes, or young people. So in this case, you'd actually have to get in touch with the correspondent who administers the trust and ask them for a form. And it's got their contact details there and other information. So again, I think one of the things that we'd be looking for, if we were applying, you might want to apply for certain projects that you have outside of the university, but if you're applying for research purposes within the university, one of the things that we'd be looking for here is, under exclusions, registered charities only. That would probably exclude us straight away. Yeah. If it's a trust that has a very specific funding stream that really is very closely matches what you want to raise funds for, it might even be worth phoning them up and saying, look, I know it says this in the entry that you've got in this directory, but I just wondered if it would be set in stone or whether you could be flexible, because these are probably 90%, 95% accurate, these entries. They're not entirely accurate because the information needs to get updated every year. And sometimes if they can't find the information, they leave the entry in from the year before and that kind of thing. So sometimes, don't take everything that's written here as 100% correct. If you're not sure, it's worth phoning the trust to ask them. But I want to make clear that it probably won't ever say here, we give to research. Yeah, that's it's just a kind of implied that if there's a project behind it, there will be a research component to go with it.
And there is no implication of whatsoever. That says nothing about research. Not even, explicitly, not explicitly or implicitly, it doesn't say anything about research. What is your advice? Is there a point?
Okay, so it's worth looking at. One of the things I was going to say later is a lot of these have websites, and they've got much more specific information, especially the larger trusts, about the kind of work that is and wouldn't be included. So it's worth looking at that information as well. And if you're really not sure, having done all that kind of background work, just phone them up and ask.
I don't know, just to continue this,
Yeah.
I'm thinking that, when you do this standard academic grant, you say, right, what's your research? Oh, by the way, can you say something about impacts, how you're going to give back to some, some of that. Whereas I'm assuming with this, it's like, well, you can do some research if you like, but we want to know how this money is going to help our particular group.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of thinking that is the other thing with academics, like, maybe you can include a partner who's involved in that, who's a practitioner, something like that. Like, again, with this, is maybe that answers your thing. It's like, I don't know whether this starts to become circular, but you say, I'm going to partner up with an active charity that actually does put this on the ground. We will do the coordination, but they are going to do the delivery of the actual, something like that. I mean, I don't know how it might work.
Well, how would they know who
experience.
is going to do delivery? Do you mean I would phone them up and say, do you know someone who might be interested in doing it?
Well, I'm sort of speculating if you had an idea about a funding thing, but then funding stream, but then you partnered up with a charity to deliver a particular thing.
I think
and you
that's-
then work
Yeah.
in partnership with them so that you do the research, they do the implementation, and it's a joint thing.
But they have to
I think when we're writing these proposals, we probably have to emphasise the practical, the implementation, if you like. So in a sense, I wouldn't say the complete opposite of what we're used to doing, but there's more of an emphasis on the practical stuff. And the research stuff, because they're not academics, they're not researchers, they wouldn't really
care about publication.
Well, they would care, but it wouldn't be. You wouldn't need to emphasise it to them in the same way. In terms of the partner organisation, yeah, I mean absolutely. One thing that they want to know is, as I said earlier, can they trust you to deliver the stuff? What's the reputation of the groups that are kind of implementing or doing the research and implementing? So definitely, that's obviously worth including if it's relevant. So there's some other ideas here. The Charity Commission website is free to use. I'm sure those of you that worked with charities before have seen it and used it. But basically this is a record of all, I'm not even sure how many registered charities there are in the UK. It's a six-figure number. Yeah. Obviously not all of them give grants, but a lot of them do. So what you do here, and this is particularly useful probably, well in fact no, you can do it in for any kind of project, but there's a search facility on here, find charities. Advanced search. So this is basically a register of every single charity in the UK, okay, and it's got information about each one. So let's say we need to invent a project here. Has anyone got a project in mind that they're interested in or that they've done in the past that they might want to raise funds for? So let's think of something business school related.
Let's do mental health.
Mental health, okay. Mental health. Mental wellness. Yeah.
That should be plenty.
And then we want it to be grant giving, so these two are important actually. We'll say organisations because we're going to apply as Middlesex. Yeah, and you can see there's loads. Okay. So, just to kind of, let's go through one. The PMGC Charitable Foundation. I've never heard of them before.
No.
So it gives you, this is a very small one, okay. It would be better to look at a larger one, if we can. Future Development Foundation. Okay, this seems to be more overseas, but that's fine. These countries here.
What is the difference between areas benefit
Say again?
and if you go back? This is the area. If you go back.
Okay, let me. I'll just pick one here, and then we'll. The Chartley Foundation, and we'll actually look through this in a bit more detail. It hasn't got the figures there. I'm trying to look for a big one.
Association.
Say again?
Go to the Football Association. They're bound to have.
Where's that?
It's further down.
After the Chartley
Oh, we did that. Okay. Yeah, good idea. Okay, so it gives out about, well last year it gave out £226,000 of grants. This is, it looks to, here it's got the activities. So it's financial assistance to football clubs. And I imagine part of what they do, and it might have some more detailed information in a minute, is part of looking after football clubs is the mental health of footballers. Yeah, because you all know what happens to people like Justin Fashanu, and we talked to Elizabeth about this as well. So, because there's probably somewhere in their entry, it will have the words mental health, which is why it got captured in the search that we did. So, activities tells you roughly what they do. That's where it operates. This is how much funding they give out. A key thing to look at is their accounts, and I'll tell you why. When you're applying to a charitable trust or foundation, they're likely, one of the things that you want to look at is actually the record of grants they've given out before, because it will give you a good indication about who they're going to give to, what kind of projects they're going to give to. Again, so in their accounts it explains a bit more about the objectives and activities. I used to spend half my life looking through these things. There's all the kind of boring financial information. What I'm interested in is the grants list. It doesn't look like I've got them. But a lot of them do have actual list of grants. Yeah, especially the bigger ones will have an actual list of grants.
Grants, I did have one for grants though.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, just as you
I've got ahead of myself.
Grants and donations payable.
Yeah. No, what I mean is actually have like an itemised
Oh, I
list.
see what you mean.
Yeah.
Well, it does actually show they pay grants though, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So we know that they give grants out.
A lot of detail.
And from there, probably they've got their own website. And it's just a question of searching that through Google or something. The other thing is interesting is it's got a list of the contacts, the trustees. The trustees are the ones who make the decisions about where the grant funding goes. So this is one way of actually doing research on specific individuals and their own interests. Yeah, because if you can do that, if you can get the interest of one of them at least, then when your application comes up at the table and they're discussing it amongst the trustee board, one of them will basically make your case for you if you've lobbied them before.
So you can, it's normative to approach individuals before?
That's a good question. You have to be careful. you have to be careful about how you do it. It depends on case-by-case basis. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later when we talk about how you lobby in events and stuff like that. But remind me to come back to that then if I forget. Charity framework. Okay, that's just again classification.
Can I ask you here something?
Give me 1 second. Charity summary. Oh yeah, this is the submission that we've made to the Charity Commission. But basically, you can see there's some useful information there. Yeah. So the Institute of Fundraising is another kind of fundraising organisation that provides resources. They do a lot of training sessions as well. Now, voluntary action centres are interesting because these exist in a lot of kind of towns and cities around the UK. I think the nearest one I know of to us is actually in Chalk Farm. But it's like a charity resource centre that has all these kind of resources freely available to members of the public. You don't even have to be a registered charity to use them. So, yeah. The other thing actually about the DSC is, you remember I said that it has a centre in Euston. It's also got its library there. Yeah, and you can go in and use the library with all these resources. And they've got loads more directories and loads more. They've got a computer that's linked up to the online versions of these things too. And you don't even have to book. I mean, it's worth phoning up in the morning that you go down there if you do, and just saying, look, you definitely open today or whatever. But you can go and use the facilities there. Hopefully, as I say, Sarah and I will talk to the people here and we'll get the facilities sorted out for you guys here at Middlesex. Anyway, there are online funding resources. So these are, you obviously have to pay for them, but again, we can look into them. So there's things like trustfunding.org.uk, governmentfunding.org.uk, grantsforindividuals.org.uk and so on. And they're like online versions of all these directories as well. So I want us to have a look at a couple of trust examples, yeah, of the websites. Because the website is obviously a key place when we're researching the grant funding body, yeah, to find out more about them. So this one is the Sir Halley Stewart Trust Foundation. As you can see, this is probably named after this, well, it is named after this individual, Sir Halley Stewart. He may be alive, he may not be alive. Okay, a lot of trusts still have the lead kind of trustee is very much still alive and kicking. So Rowling, yeah, she's got a trust, a charitable trust, for example, that gives out loads of money, largely for children's causes, for example, off the back of Harry Potter book sales. So what you do is, this isn't the actual website, this is kind of cut and paste. It's got a background to the trust, and this is usually how the trust was formed, kind of what purposes it gives to and that kind of thing. Grant is in a bit more detail about the kinds of grants that are given. So in this instance, as you can see here, the trust welcome proposals for projects in the UK which attempt to do these things. So I'm sure that most of us, within the business school even, certainly in my department in LWO, there are some projects that exist within the work that we do that, for example, support vulnerable people or disadvantaged, maybe unemployed people, older people, stuff like that. Then the specific aspects they're interested in, well, this is perfect for us, unemployment, mental health problems there for Elizabeth. I chose that one especially for you.
I've looked at this site.
Okay, excellent. That's why I put it on. So the Trust also funds a small number of education, water and healthcare projects, principally in developing countries. Okay, so that part's not so relevant for us, but it might be. And there are kind of groups within Middlesex, like the Wellbeing Foundation that Jackie Jeffrey runs, who do stuff with overseas projects as well. So this is an example of one trust that probably would accept, proposals from us. But again, it'd be worth phoning up just to make sure.
The thing about that one is it only funds charities.
Okay, that's interesting. Did you phone them up and ask?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a perfect example then. So you might find that useful for other mental health stuff that you do that is outside the university. But in this instance, it's another example of us doing the research beforehand so as not to waste their time. Do they support charitable, only charitable registered organisations? This one definitely does give to universities. It's one of, and it's quite a well-known large foundation, Garfield Weston. It gives out £50 million of project funds every year, including for education funding. And you can see here, investing in formal and informal learning across the country. We support organisations across the country that demonstrate excellence, from universities and special schools to museums and out-of-school provision. So again, it's got the kind of key areas they support there. It's got the grant funding forms here, how to make an application. And across the top, again, all the key information, especially how to apply and that kind of thing. So that's another example. How are people for time? Does anyone have to leave at 2?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll do it discreetly.
Okay. Anyone else? Does anyone else have to leave? 2 as well. I'm just getting to meet. Okay. I'll try and speed up a little bit then.
Can I just ask Dan?
Yeah.
It's quite important. With something like the Garfield Weston Foundation, you can see that you're eligible to apply. You've got a project sort of fairly formed in your mind. I always find it's worth giving it a punt and just trying to get hold of the project officer, informally warm them up about the idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I can't emphasise enough is the importance of like the informal approach before the formal approach. Yeah. Don't be scared to use the phone and phone up the key person, especially with the large foundations, because they've specifically got someone there for that purpose. Often they've got a whole team of people there for that purpose. Garfield Weston, £50 million of funds, they're bound to have a team of people. Yeah? And that's really important at so many levels. You know, it's important because it will, you know, it will save your time for making an application that's kind of a waste of time because it's actually doesn't actually qualify. It will help you to ask questions to tailor your application more to exactly what they're after, or you might decide you have to tailor it too much and that they're not worth applying to. Most importantly of all, it will put your project in the mind of the people that either make the decisions or the gatekeepers to the people that make the decisions. Because if you can imagine, these trusts receive hundreds and hundreds of applications every year, sometimes thousands, and they've got a pile that high. A typical kind of trust will have people sat down in a room, they'll spend half a day wafting through applications. Yeah? So yours has to stand out, and it has to be remembered. And if you've lobbied someone beforehand, whether it be a trustee or the administrator who, you know, is the one who, often what they'll do is they'll take all the information that you send in and they'll write down the key points and they'll summarise it for the trustees, each application. They might even say something, do you know what, I had a conversation with Elizabeth from Middlesex University about this project and it sounds great to me. You know, she ticks all the right boxes, she's got this expertise in that. And then they've half convinced their trustees for you. So, in the instance of, I imagine this is probably true as well of things like British Academy and stuff like that, but I know that other people are more qualified to speak than me on that. But certainly in the case of large trusts and foundations, definitely phone them up before, and probably even if you can get hold of the number of small to medium-sized ones as well, I would do the same thing. So, okay, so I think I'm going to skip some of this stuff because it's more relevant for NGOs and charities. But okay, this thing about warm contacts, I'm going to emphasise this. And it's again going back to something I've emphasised quite a few times before about trust. Yeah. The more, obviously, there's a level of formality involved when you're making an approach to a trust or foundation or a grant funding body. But there's also you have to put yourself in the position of the people that make the decisions. Yeah. They get so many applications that are quite dry and cold and very standard, very using highly formalised language, that frankly, they just get bored. Yeah. So part of I think half of the work, actually, half of the chance of success comes in the work that you do before. Yeah, before you make the application. And that includes trying to find some way to get in touch with the trustees. So coming back to Jochan's question earlier, the trustees that are involved themselves. So, and establishing some kind of link with them, yeah, or remembering or thinking about their own, researching them, finding out about their own interests, and then kind of like, you know, once you've got those people in mind, you can make the application with them very much in mind, because when they hear about the application, even if you've never spoken to them before, if it's very much to do with their personal interests, providing that the project is, you know, falls within the remit of what the trust can give funding for, they will probably leap up at the table and start trying to convince the other trustees to give money to you. So, just to give you a couple of examples of how I've done this in the past. And a lot of it is just through the networks that we make all the time, okay? Because trustees are often rich, wealthy people with money, but they're often experts that are asked to join a trustee board of a foundation. And it might well be an expert in the area of work that we work in. So it might be an expert in mental health, might sit on a kind of welfare trust or foundation as their mental health expert. Or it might be someone like a labour expert who's working for a trust that works with kind of exclusion and unemployment issues. Part of it is about who we meet in our everyday life. I was at the House of Lords and I can't remember why I was there. No, it was House of Parliament. Yeah, I was working with, it's one of the charities that I used to work for. They which one was it? I don't know. Anyway, I bumped into a lord there, as you do, yeah. And he was telling me we got talking about children's charitable work, because I was working for a charity that supported kids, and he told me that his son was disabled, had a disability, quite serious disability, and so again I remembered this years later, and when I worked for the National Children's Bureau, this is a couple of years before I started at Middlesex, I actually wrote to a trust that he sat on with a project that was supporting children with a particular kind of disability that his son had. And I wrote the letter to him. And again, it was a success because I remembered this thing. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the time it's about data capture through informal conversations, but it might even be just through informal research that you do into the trustees and their interests. Yeah? So
When you send this application, did you contact him in advance for this particular application or no?
not in advance, but I wrote the letter to him, so I personalised it. Yeah.
So you applied to the foundation, or you applied, or you contacted trustees?
No, I wrote to this individual at the foundation.
How can you contact? Well, that's very.
I didn't write to his home address because he probably got annoyed.
Yeah, because I actually was saying kind of, it sounds like, well, my question is, if you apply for those grants,
Yeah.
it may be worth, well, there might be a formal procedure, but maybe like top-bottom approach. So get them, who are the trustees, write, well, not to their home address, obviously,
Yeah.
but to the institution, but name the letter, or name the application, or some, maybe send him a letter in advance,
Yeah.
or maybe even contact this person in advance and get some advice about what area
Yeah.
of you're interested in, and then you kind of give a bit of a promo to your proposal, and lobby your proposal in a way
Well,
forward.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, you have to do these things. You know, if
Like
it's
what you do in the
reasonable.
EU. That's what people do in the EU. They
Yeah.
network and then they apply for the
That's
grant
right.
they
You
want.
have to do these things if you can, but you have to, you have to walk the line between annoying them too much that
Yeah.
they, that's a question of judgment, really. But just even if it's not, I suppose we're kind of jumping the gun a bit here, but even if it's not actually having some kind of, having some kind of personal attachment and identifying what that is, it could be something as simple as when you're making the approach, when you're phoning up on the phone, see what you want to try and get them to remember you when your application comes in, right? So it might just be that you have a really friendly conversation on the phone with the gatekeeper, with the administrator, or with the trustee, yeah? And that will be one way that they'll remember you when the application comes in from that conversation. But I always try and say something memorable to them when I'm speaking on the phone to them. So one tactic I've used, and you might find this quite amusing, is I once, in fact a few times I've tried this trick, my secret will get out I'm telling it to you. I actually sat there on the phone talking to the trustee with an empty packet of crisps in my hand, and I was making a rustling noise, right? And they were like, oh, it seems like your telephone line's really bad. And I was like, yeah, I'm really sorry about that. The line seems to be really bad. And hold on, let me do this, let me do that. I shake it around a bit. Anyway, we started laughing at this, yeah? And then in the end, she obviously didn't know I was crackling it, because she couldn't see me. But when I wrote the application, I said to her, well, I wrote the letter to her as a trustee, I said, dear Janet, it was lovely speaking to you last week. You'll be pleased to hear that I've got my phone fixed now. You know, just establishing those little lines of personal contact, right? And again, the grant came. The grant came because she remembered me. Again, the project wasn't a load of rubbish. It was a very good project.
Next to you.
Huh?
The cat meowing next to you, baby.
Exactly, that's another good one. If you can force
Unless
your
they
cat
hate
to meow
cats.
at you somehow, when else
Unless
can
they,
you do that?
unless they hate cats, and then you're in
Right.
trouble.
So again, you have to think. So what I'm trying to say is personal contact, yeah? The cold, dry application still has a chance if you do everything else right, but the key is actually in the warm contact and the personalised approach and stuff like that. So is there a good match between the funder and the project? Okay, so this is key. They all give to very specific causes, yeah? And you have to match your project up with those things. That's a very important thing to do. So does your project fit with the level of funding offered? So if your project is 150 grand and the trust that you're looking at only gives grants out for £200 or £300, it's probably not really worth applying because it's a drop in the ocean. Just one example. Does it fit with the geographical area of support? Yeah? So we know some trusts give only to overseas causes, some only give to London, some only give to Yorkshire, some only give to the UK. Where is your project going to take place in, or where is it going to be delivered in, for example? Type of funding offered, does that match up? You know, target group, obviously. You know, if you're supporting people for mental health reasons, then is that obviously in their criteria? If it is, then you know you'll probably be able to apply, subject to all the other things we've spoken about. Obviously, if not, then it might not say necessarily people with mental health conditions. It might say vulnerable people. It might say, I don't know, like anything like that, or you know, and people who face exclusion, for example, or face discrimination. So then, in your case, it would fit within that. But then, you know, you might phone up and say specifically, you know, would you support this kind of project? And the type of work funded. So, you can often identify this from the material that they show, whether your actual project and what it's aiming to do falls within their remit. And then, is there a good match between the funder and your organisation? So, if you're working for a charity, you know, say your charity is a small, you know, say it's a small charity that focuses very particularly on one particular region, and one of the stipulations might be we only give to charities that support national work. Yeah, so therefore you'd be excluded. So another thing is there a fit between a good match between the funder and the charity? Sometimes there are also preconditions that they set. Yeah. So for example, if you've got a project working with children, for argument's sake, some trusts will say, well, you have to have a child protection policy within your organisation in place in order to apply, because they want to try and promote best practice. And if you haven't got one, well, you can probably more or less invent one and get it approved by whoever has to approve it and then apply. But you just need to check these kind of match-up things. Timescales. Most charitable trusts don't fund retrospectively, so it needs to be something that's going to be done. Best use of resources. This is quite key for us at Middlesex, okay? And Sarah and I have been talking about this. We make loads of grant applications every year as a business school, as different departments, as a university. Within, I think it's Nick Bowstone, isn't it, who centralises these things, yeah? It might be the case that there's a very big foundation, for example, that you think for your research project would be really great, but actually there's more work, there's work in a different department being done, that from Middlesex University's organisational perspective or strategy or whatever, it might be better for them to apply rather than you. So Sarah and I at the moment are working through some kind of, working with Nick to make sure that everything's streamlined and we're not kind of jumping over each other. This is obviously a fairly new area for us to look into, Trusted Foundation fundraising. We have done it before with Roundtree and some of the big ones, but we're looking to broaden it out. And that's a bit of a minefield in an organisation as large as ours, because we don't want to be sending 2 applications in, say, from the same organisation to the same trust, and stuff like that. So watch this space in that regard, because there will be some developments on that in the next few months, probably. Yeah, okay. I'll skip through that. I'll skip through this one as well, because it's not really relevant to us. Fundraising from individuals, again, it's probably not so much for us, it's more for kind of charities and small NGOs and stuff. But one thing I suppose that is worth looking into is wealthy alumni. Okay, and again, I know the development officer, well, they work with alumni to try and leverage funding, but they obviously aren't in touch with all of the rich, wealthy alumni. You might find one who you feel has, again, it's going back to the question of connection, yeah? As ex-Middlesex students or people that have been involved, we're part of the same community. You're constantly trying to look for some kind of connection, personal connection with the people that you're applying to. So, Anish Kapoor, Helen Mirren, Ray Davis from the Kinks are all examples of kind of Middlesex alumni who are probably pretty loaded, quite frankly. Do you know who this guy is? Nick Leeson. You know, the guy who walked down Barings Bank. Probably not worth applying to him. But he's Middlesex alumnus. So, yeah. Anyway, so, you might find one of these people who has some kind of personal connection again to some project that you're involved with, and you might want to target them and make the approach, and obviously as soon as they see me, if it does eventually get to them, that's another question altogether. If they see Middlesex University, their eyes will probably light up a bit.
How did you find out about those individuals and on our approaches to such individuals coordinators?
That's a good question. I found out about this kind of wiki, actually, just like Middlesex alumni, and it had a list of famous alumni, Middlesex famous alumni. But yeah, this is another thing about centralising, okay? We do need to make sure that we're not kind of approaching if the university's made an institutional approach. But quite honestly, I think the development office is probably so busy with loads of other stuff that they do, good stuff that they do, that it might just be worth a quick call to Nick or whoever else and just say, look, I'm thinking of doing this, I'm going to put some time and energy into making this approach to Anish, just to let you know, basically, and then just doing it that way. Because, well, we don't know what they're doing. It might be that they've got they might be sending Martin Driscoll round to their houses to have cups of tea with us. They don't know. And then if they get an application from us, it's going to look a bit, well, it might annoy him, and it might actually be bad for both of us to do that. So it might just be worth dropping. Again, we're looking at the centralising process and how we can streamline all this stuff. So, coming towards the end now. Before, again, we haven't made the application yet, but the first thing you need to do is obviously convince yourself of the worth of the project. I mean, that sounds obvious. But you need, when you phone up or even when you write, you need to be convincing, you need to be passionate, and all that stuff. So convince yourself. Research donor biographies. Yeah? Nothing's irrelevant. So this is kind of going back to the thing I said earlier about the guy that I met at the House of Parliament with the disabled son. Yeah? These bits of information, even when you're reading about them, so Helen Mirren, for example, most people don't know that she studied here at Middlesex at some point, but that's obviously of interest to us. So yeah, these things need to be captured and emphasised in the covering letters that we make. Obviously, you wouldn't say, oh, I remember that conversation about your disabled son, I thought blah, 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 but you'd kind of insinuate, do you know what I mean? So you obviously need to be careful with how you utilise that biographical information to make the approach. There are subtle ways that you can go about doing that. Another thing that's useful is competitor analysis. And what I mean by this is basically, as I said earlier, charities list their funders at the back of their accounts. So charitable trusts and foundations list them. It's worth looking in there for all of those that have supported universities in the past, because then you'll know, that they definitely do support universities, for example. Or say your project is about LGBT issues, yeah? You might be asking yourself, well, I wonder whether they would give to this. In their kind of objectives, it says they give to people for, I don't know, groups that face minority groups, yeah? But you might not necessarily know whether LGBT is within that. So in the list of grants at the end, say they've given funding before, you can actually identify that they've given funding before to charities that work with LGBT people, then you can apply, you know that actually there's a decent chance because those are the kinds of projects they've funded before. You see what I mean? So, yeah, it's worth doing that. So, I shouldn't really call them competitors, but frankly, we're all trying to get funding from these organisations, so other charities are competitors. Sadly, it's horrible.
I think that's probably the most important thing in my experience, is actually, because we all think our projects are unique and wonderful, but actually, well, they are, might be wonderful, but they're unlikely to be unique. So actually, even being able to identify who else is going to be applying to these donors, and also going onto their websites and seeing where they raised money in the past. That's the best really way of finding out. Good.
It's sly, but it's fair.
I mean,
it's legitimate.
You have to be transparent about it. These foundations, it's okay.
It's legitimate, yeah, completely. Yeah, I've done that before a few times. Yeah. Be aware of deadlines. This is really key, because every single charitable trust will have a separate deadline. Often they'll meet every 3 months, sometimes every 6 months, sometimes every week, sometimes once a year. So you need to be aware of when the deadlines are, and they will always be stated on the websites. They'll often be stated on the charitable trust directories that we spoke about earlier as well. And you just need to be aware of those deadlines in your head. Yeah? You don't miss them. I've gone through the telephone, so I won't go over that again. And just events and meetings, it's just social networking stuff, yeah, talking to people, finding out what trust they might sit on once you've met them, or after you've met them, that kind of thing. And it's always good as well. I mean, I think part of the reason why I was relatively successful in what I used to do is because I would do a lot of this. I'm shamelessly admitting it, but it kind of worked.
Well, it's part of a skill.
It is, yeah. Yeah. So these are kind of general fundraising things again that I'm sure a lot of them are common sense, but it's worth just going over them and reminding ourselves. So we're actually on to the project now, the project itself. It mustn't duplicate an existing service. So when you actually write the application, you need to make this very clear that we're doing this piece of research and this project delivery because it hasn't been done before, no one else does it, and so this is why, you need to express what makes your project unique. You see what I mean? So, if the research is already being done, then there's no point in applying. It's the same thing with writing a paper, I suppose. When you write an academic paper, why is it filling a gap? That kind of stuff. There is a case to be made. If you feel that you can provide a service that already exists but better, obviously you can apply under those circumstances as well. Yeah, these services already exist within this area, but we think we can do it better. We've got the expertise. We've got that kind of X factor. Call it that. The other thing is, this is quite key. It's a kind of principle that applies to the voluntary sector in all kinds of aspects. That the project needs, you want to try and show that the project isn't just something that you've thought up on your own, that would be a great idea, even if it's backed by research, but to some extent, the people that are going to be benefiting from it at the end of the day have the demands come from them in some way. Yeah, so they've identified, you know, a lack of service provision or whatever it might be. Yeah, so it's what's called demand-led projects, and grant-making organisations are quite keen on this these days. So they want to see that, you know, the actual, don't want to call them service users, but you know what I mean. They're actually the ones that have, you know, that are interested in the thing that you're doing. And also actually that they're involved in the delivery as well, yeah? So you're not just kind of like, we're not just up here in our ivory towers kind of coming up with all these projects and stuff, but in the delivery, the beneficiaries are actually involved in the management and administration, and there's like a participatory approach to the whole thing going on, yeah? Trustees love that kind of stuff, yeah? Again, like, why do you stand out in the project? You need to say this, why are we innovative? Why are we doing things in a new way, in an exciting way that hasn't been done before? And also cost effectiveness. This is donors' money, remember, and they want to know that it's going to go a long way. You're not just going to, you know, obviously blow it all. But how can you guarantee that, you know, funding, you know, it'd be most cost effective? So I used to work with NGOs a lot. So what I would say is, you know, if you can give us a grant, even if it's £1,000, in a country like Sierra Leone, this can go an absolutely phenomenal way, yeah, using these funds in a way that in other parts of the world it couldn't do. And so it's just like, you know, big, yeah, making money go a long way. Not being purely assistentialist, so a lot of grant-making bodies, I suppose it's to do with the whole kind of international development paradigm and that kind of thing, ways of thinking, that they don't just want to be seen as like us providing a service and then it not becoming self-sustainable, or the service users or the beneficiaries not actually doing anything in return. Yeah. So they want to see, like, they want to know that the people that are being assisted are also helping themselves in some way, and it's just kind of like a question of kind of making that known, and it's quite open to interpretation how that should be done, but it's something that they see as quite important, yeah.
Sure,
So,
I'm not sure I follow you.
Well, it's kind of like, you know, the adage about give a man to fish, give a man a fishing rod and he'll feed his family for life, giving fish, and do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like that kind of idea that you need to get across to them, that there are systems in place within the project which involves the people that are being supported or for who are going to benefit from the change, but they're also doing something in terms of their involvement as well to assist the project or to assist others themselves. Yeah. So mental health, you know, it might be, yeah, we're involved in this project, we're going to set it up, and these the demand has come from them. Yeah, they've identified that they're being neglected and the government cuts are closing a particular service, so therefore we're going to go and replace it with this one. And as part of the whole deal, they'll receive support from this project, and then they'll go on to mentor people in the similar situation to them. Comments?
Can I just raise the last point? Can you explain that last point?
Oh, about the registered thing? Yeah, that's just about the... I think that's just about the... about, you know, having to be registered as a charitable organisation or not. And this is, you know, what I was saying right at the start about that would exclude us as a university from, I don't know how, what, I'm not going to give you a percentage, but it would exclude us from some trusts. That's what I'm to there, Chris.
Apparently, most UK universities aren't charities, so it might be worth checking to see whether Middlesex is as well.
Right. Well, I've looked into it. We can't be a charity because we're government funded. We have charity exempt status. Yeah. Basically, because we fall under, with the Charity Commission who regulate these things, you know, the key question is who are we accountable to? Yeah. And because we've got other bodies that we report to and we're accountable to, so government, FG and so on, we can't be a charity, yeah? Even if we're delivering charitable purposes. Now, I know Jackie had this issue. Jackie Jeffrey, she's trying to establish the Wellbeing Foundation, here, which it's doing some amazing work in Gambia and places like that, with students here, you know, but they couldn't get charitable status through the university. They haven't tried to get it separately yet. One thing I've worked with, I was working with one organisation that does, it supports political prisoners in Colombia, trade unions largely, and what they actually ended up doing is, because they were campaigning a political organisation, they couldn't get charitable status. But there are subtle ways of getting kind of charitable status through some kind of educational arm or something like that. So I know, for example, the anti-fascist organisation Searchlight has the same thing. It has a charitable wing that does educational work that's separate from the campaigning wing. So there might be routes to go down with that, yeah, that we could actually be semi-autonomous of Middlesex, but still involving Middlesex, but establishing some kind of charitable wing within the small, discrete project that we have. But again, that will involve a conversation outside of here, because we don't really have time for it today. Is it 3:45?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thanks for staying with me. I'm going to ask that maybe we don't have any more questions. That you ask me like outside, because I just want to make sure that all this is covered before the end. This is just a project that I was involved in with Tibetan refugees. Some kind of key points here about, we've already mentioned some of this stuff already. So I emphasise it as the only NGO working in the Spiti Valley, which is the region of the Himalayas where they were operating. So there were no other competitors, if you like. Local nurses approached the charity, so the demand came from, from the grassroots. It's run entirely by volunteers, so their overheads were low. These are things that I emphasised to the trust when I was making approaches. Participants helped to sustain the project. I think partly this is to do with kind of income generations, partly to do with kind of, for example, if we were teaching numeracy, some of the adults of the children would help the teachers in the classroom with that. It's all that kind of thing. Cost effective. Getting the involvement of kind of well-known, or not well-known, but people with some kind of reputation or authority also helps. So we got the Dalai Lama in this case. That was before I was involved, so I can't take any credit for that. But that was really like a big plus with the trust fundraisers. You can imagine, charitable trust, you can imagine, Dalai Lama's put his name to it. So, yeah, income generation. So writing the application form, I'm probably going to whiz over this a bit, given time restrictions, because I think a lot of us have already written applications with using forms before. And the kind of funders that I'm talking about, only the very large ones will require you to do a form usually. Most of the time it's you just write the application however you want to. But there's the other ways as well. Sometimes you get asked to do an oral presentation, it's quite rare, and just kind of writing your own thing. But basically those are some rules there for writing a proposal in terms of grant application form. They ask questions for a reason, you have to write strong answers for all of them. Be concise. How you fit in the objectives. Making sure you check the English and the grammar, obviously that's quite a basic point, but I'm sure just a few small grammar errors and then they've lost interest, because it seems amateurish. Smart objectives, I suppose you're all familiar with those. This is a key point here. If you're not sure about a particular point or a particular question that's being asked, just phone up and ask for clarification. It's better you do that than you write something wrong. Because the level of kind of competition in the, for funds is so tight nowadays that all you've got to do is write the wrong answer to one question, and then basically all the other stuff you've written is kind of devalued, or it puts you behind in the ranking order to instead of number 1, number 5. And there could be 4 grants they give out, and then you've lost it. So it's always worth phoning up and clarifying what is meant and how you're supposed to answer a particular thing they're asking about. So this is what I want to emphasise then, with charitable trusts and foundations, is writing your own proposal. Yeah? And this is important in terms of when we're discussing the structure that we use, what kind of information goes in. And most funders nowadays, they use what's called an outcomes-based approach. So as well as wanting to see a good match between your project and the criteria that they have, they also want to see clearly defined outcomes that are evidenced in some way. Yeah. So, what changes are you going to be able to implement, and how are you going to measure them? Yeah. What evidence can you provide that those outcomes are going to be made, yeah, or delivered upon? So anyway, that's the outcomes-based approach, and this is the structure that I would suggest. Starting off with the evidence of need, and I don't mean that you need to kind of throw in half an academic paper on kind of, evidence and, all that kind of thing, but basic facts and figures, basic points to do with that, to start with. Now, the outcomes and the outputs are different things. Okay, they sound similar, but they're different. So outcomes are the kind of broad changes that you want to see happen. So it could be broader changes in society. So it could be, more people in work, or it could be tidier communities, or it could be something broad. So it's a general change. That's the outcome, and you want to contribute towards this. Outputs are the specific activities that you are going to affect as a result of the project. So we're talking here about the numbers of people that you want to try and get into work. We're talking about the number of workshops you're going to set up as part of the project that you do, and that kind of thing. Then a description of the project, using case studies to make it seem more real, perhaps, or to help the trustees relate to it. Throwing in the budget, I'm sure you've done this, those of you that applied to research funds before. Monitoring the evaluation, explaining how you're going to monitor the project and how you're going to ensure that it's running smoothly, and how your successes are going to be measured, and that kind of thing. So you need to have a monitoring and evaluation plan in place. Sustainability and having an exit strategy. This goes back to things that were mentioned earlier about you don't want to be involved forever. Yeah, at some point, it needs to become self-sustaining or something like that. It's also worth some point in this stating who the other funders are for the project, because it will give you more legitimacy. Yeah, the project is already supported by these organisations. They've given their funds before. Yeah, so we're now asking you to give your funds, because if a trust can see that someone else has kind of risked their money to support the project you're involved with, they're also more likely to do so. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, big writing tips. Continue. So, Ian was asking a question earlier about partnerships. Most funders nowadays, including government, including the National Lottery, but charitable trusts and foundations, they are getting a bit tired of lots of organisations doing exactly the same work, calling themselves something different. They want to see more cohesiveness in the sector, more working together. So it's important that if you are doing a piece of work that another charity or another kind of organisation or another body has expertise in, they want to see a kind of coordinated approach, that you're maybe working with them, or that you've in some way created mechanisms to work together. Track record, clearly, this is really important. Yeah, it's very important that you. Are you in here, David, for the three?
Three.
Okay, cool.
Started at 3.
Okay. What time is it now?
Sorry?
What time is it now?
It's 5 to.
All right. Can you give me 3 minutes?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be out by just before 5 to. Okay, I'm going to have to whiz through really, really fast. So, track record, yeah. We've mentioned this before. Obviously making the presentation look good, so throwing in photos, throwing in facts and figures, just generally making it look nice, yeah. Gaining trust, we've been through this several times, the importance of that. So the organisation's reputation is Middlesex, but your own reputation or the colleagues that you're working with, academic reputations in the field, perhaps professional expertise in the field and so on. Main achievements, details of key personnel, so this could be possibly even people higher up at Middlesex who are involved with the organisation. Sometimes charities use lords and ladies, people with MBEs, you know, stuff like that. Trust, love, that kind of thing, because the people that sit on the boards tend to be the people that walk in these circles. Yeah, they tend to walk in circles of, you know, high-powered, if you like. List to existing funders, as I said earlier. Writing a covering letter, remember, yes, we need to be formal, but also throw in those kind of snippets of informality and personalness. The purpose of a covering letter, it goes with your proposal, but it's kind of like getting them to read the proposal. That's the main purpose of it. So it's kind of summarising the proposal in one sheet of A4. So yes, it's a begging letter, but it's also kind of getting them interested to look at the more detailed project proposal that could be 3 or 4 sides of paper or something like that. So, yeah, basically summary of the population that we serve and the need, polite but personalised, addressing the named person. This is really key, like, you know, don't just say dear sir or madam, but finding out, it's like a job application. You're writing to a particular person as well. Clearly stating the amount that you require and what you're going to do with that. Yeah, some people break it down. This X number of, this grant that we're asking for of £5,000 will go towards providing a service that will create a youth employment project.
That's the impact, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going back to impact for 500 people. Stuff like that. Okay. And then just a word of caution. Some grant funding bodies require you to include additional information, and that additional information could be any of these things. Some of them, again, are very much targeted towards charities and NGOs, but be aware that you must include these if they ask for them specifically, because not including them could, if they want them, could automatically disqualify you. After the application, no, it's not over yet, because there's the whole thing about data capture, finding out what's happened if they haven't, what the reasons why, if they haven't given you funding, so that you can go back maybe next time, or as an organisation, once we develop these centralised kind of mechanisms, we can help colleagues to go back to the organisation by saying, yes, well, we applied there last year or 2 years ago, and they rejected the application then for these reasons. And then that's useful information for the new people to use to go back to for the next time. So if they do give you a grant, obviously it's very important you send a thank you letter, and I would say a letter of progress at some point, maybe 6 months later or a year later, about how the project has developed and evolved and the successes that it's gained. Because remember what I said at the beginning, you're 7 times more likely to get funding again from the same funder than you are from going to a grant funder for the first time. Okay. So yeah, just maintain the relationship is the key point here, and maybe another time I can do another session about that. And scheduling your next approach as well. Yeah, that's important. So this is the project cycle then. That's basically what it looks like. A little bit like the learning cycle, cold, but in this context. So you start by doing the research into funders, you make the contact, to make the warm contact, then you make the approach, you follow up whether you've got the grant or you haven't, then you capture the data, and that informs your next approach for each funder and so on. So I think that's it. I hope I've given you plenty to think about. So did you want to mention anything else?
No, at the moment I think there is enough to think about.
Yeah, we're just coming out. Cheers, yeah. Bring them in. Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks very much.